Sorry.
No, you're good. Tonight is just an introductory meeting. That good?
Yeah, you got it.
All right. Tonight is just an introductory meeting so that we can introduce these topics to the public, and Brattle will then be working on them over the next several months. So when City Council did their strategic plan, they decided that we needed these studies, and really what we're going to be doing is an integrated resource plan, infrastructure resiliency, cost of service, and rate design. So going way back to the beginning, Max Wise, our assistant administrator, actually was able to enable us to work with University of Illinois at Chicago students. They were graduate students working on their graduate thesis project, and they came in and began at least some of the foundational work for the infrastructure resiliency portion of this project. And so that was kind of the initial kickoff, and that was in the early part of last year. Then by the middle of the summer of last year, we issued requests for qualifications and sent them out to various consultants. And then through the RFQ process, we ultimately ended up selecting the Brattle Group. So that kind of brings us to this evening, and I will turn it over to the Brattle gentlemen to introduce themselves. But we're going to just kick off, again, talking about integrated resource planning, infrastructure resiliency, rate design, and cost of service. Those will be the 4 studies that the city is going to embark on that'll take us into early next year. So roughly about a year from now is when the expected timeline is for all of these studies to be completed. So with that, I'm going to step aside. We will have questions and answers at the end, but I will let these gentlemen introduce themselves and go through the slides that you all have copies of. So.
Thank you, Gary. Can you all hear me in the back? Great. My name is Metin Çelebi. I'm a principal at the Brattle Group. I'm in the Boston office. I've been doing economic consulting for about 25 years now. Studies including resource planning studies like what we are doing here, as well as market evaluations and forecasting, also what we are going to do here, allocation of cost for retail purposes. So we have been doing quite a bit of these in the past. I'll be working closely with my colleague here, Mr. Suchida. Maybe you can introduce.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Suchida. I'm also a principal at the Brattle Group in the Boston office, working with Metin. I've been in the industry for 35 years this year. I started with a power plant engineer and then went through a lot of different roles, and I'm here today.
So maybe we can just start going through the slides. We have a short slide deck we prepared for you. So what we are, let's see, is this working? Yeah, that should work. So what we are hoping to do here is introduce ourselves here, the Brattle team, and a summary of the project that we are doing, which is going to have 4 studies, as Gary mentioned, and some key questions that we are going to explore and try to answer in each of those studies. Then we'll explain the timeline that we agreed on to accomplish the 4 studies and milestones, and place the times when we are going to have input from the stakeholders like you, present the draft results and finalize them. So that's the agenda here. As part of this, we are also going to touch on some of our approach in doing these studies. So happy to talk about these. So our team has pictures and names here on the screen. It's going to be led by myself and my colleague Bruce. I'll be focusing on the IRP project, IRP study, mostly integrated resource planning study. And Bruce will be leading the the work on the infrastructure resiliency, cost of service study, and the rate design study. We will be supported by a group of consultants at Brattle. They have their expertise areas that are assigned to these studies. For example, Sasha, he has expertise in resource planning and market analyses. Long Lam, with expertise in rate design. Sai Shetty, he is a cost of service expert. He is also in our Chicago office. We have a Chicago office as well, so we'll be getting some work locally. Research analysts that do a lot of the work for us, and they are very capable, are Zander and Sylvia. They are from our San Francisco office. So we talked about 4 studies. They're summarized here in terms of what they are and how they interact. The long-term planning part of it, which is on the upper left, is referring to the integrated resource planning study. So what it does is it identifies what are the future investment and contracting needs to serve the city and customers' needs in the future in a way that is meeting the city's objectives in a optimal way. It means, for example, least cost, minimizing the cost across different options, or meeting certain requirements with respect to the composition of the different portfolios that we will be analyzing. So that's the long-term planning of needs for new resources or contracts in the future to meet the needs of the city. The second one is infrastructure resiliency, which is shown as infrastructure planning here. This is about the city's delivery infrastructure, the distribution system that is likely going to need some investments in the future as a result of the aging infrastructure, as a result of the new challenges and opportunities created by distributed energy resources like solar, rooftop solar, energy resources and EVs, electric vehicles. That is going to sometimes create challenges, sometimes create opportunities to have a resilient system that will be able to withstand the increasing frequency of extreme weather events. The next one will be cost allocation. That will be the cost of service study. It will take all the costs needed to serve the customers and then allocate them to different kind of customer classes that are served by the city. And after that, we'll do the rate design work, which is going to essentially translate those costs of serving the city to rates that are reflected in your bills. And we will also be evaluating different kinds of pricing systems, let's say time of use, depending on what time of the day you are using electricity, it could be priced differently to achieve efficiency objectives and goals to, let's say, accommodate and in an effective way the EVs and solar, rooftop solar facilities. So as you can see, there are also arrows across these 4 studies. The reason it is there is it is an iterative analysis in the sense that to the extent we have, let's say, a lot of solar rooftop included in the plan, that will affect the infrastructure needs, that will affect how the rates are going to be designed. To the extent we have some innovative rates implemented, that's going to incentivize maybe more or less of those kind of resources that will be reflected in the updated IRP study that we are going to due next year. So that's kind of a rough description of what we have in mind in terms of the 4 studies. Anything you want to add, Bruce?
Yeah, so in a little bit more simplistic terms, think about long-term planning as like you're planning on opening a restaurant and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to open an Italian restaurant and serve pizza. The infrastructure planning is, okay, if I'm going to be opening a pizza store, how many, let's say, ovens do I need? How many tables do I need? I don't need a sushi counter because it's a pizza store, but that detail is kind of the infrastructure. The cost allocation is, okay, if I have, I don't know how much I have, but let's say I have $500,000 to start that pizza store. How much cost do I use for the oven? How much cost do I save to serve or pay my employees? And how much should I actually be asking the customers to pay? That's the cost of service. Then the rate design is, okay, how much should I charge for this pizza or that pizza? How much do I charge for a table charge? Do I actually give you spaghetti along with pizza, and so on and so forth? But as you go through that menu, you may realize that, okay, maybe the customers don't like the way that I charge $50 a pizza. Maybe I should bring it down to 30. Now, if I'm going to bring it down to 30, what should I do in the grander scheme of things? Do I actually shrink the store, or can I enlarge it, or do I start charging for parking or whatnots? So there's a little bit of feedback back into the long-term planning, which you go along with it. Just that in this case, we're not opening a pizza store. We're talking about how to evolve the power industry so that the utility can continue to serve electricity to you guys.
So this slide, I think we already covered most of these. Just checking if there's anything I need to mention. No, I think we are good. The key questions we address in each of these 3 studies are shown on this slide 5. The text is a bit small to read, and maybe it's too text heavy, but just bear with us. So we got 3 boxes here. One is the integrated resource planning, that's on the upper left, infrastructure resiliency, and then in the bottom, we combine the cost of service and rate design because they are answering related questions. With respect to the IRP, the kind of questions that we are going to try to answer include what are the changes in the energy and capacity needs for serving the city's electricity needs in the future? What will be the factors that will tend to increase it? What factors will tend to decrease it? With respect to the Prairie State contract that the city has, what will the retirement year of that particular facility? What are some costs that will be passed through in that contract to the city in the future? If that plant portion of it stopped generating, or let's say retired, what will be the replacement resources that could be used to reduce your exposure, financial exposure to the very volatile spot market prices in the PJM area for energy and capacity? And which resource portfolio among various others would meet the city's objectives? So those are kind of the key questions that we'll be answering in the IRP study. Bruce, maybe you can talk about the key questions on the other 4, other 3.
So in the IRP study, as Metin said, we're trying to figure out, okay, how much solar do we want? How much coal do we want? How much gas do we want? How much nuclear do we want if we want nuclear? And that kind of gives you the bigger picture of, okay, this is the Italian restaurant I'm baking. But when it comes to solar, you can have solar on your rooftops. You can have solar provided by the utility. And that split is very unclear. If you have more solar on the rooftops, that means the network that delivers power to you has to be reinforced. If there's more electric vehicles coming in, then charging stations have to be enforced. That enforcement is the infrastructure resiliency project that we're dealing with. And so it's going to be more local wires or more local charging stations or more local whatever there may be needed. And then once you do all that investment, then the question is, okay, who pays for that investment? And that is the cost of service and rate design. And here's an example. If you are sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a couple, but you are single, and the bedroom sizes are identical, how would you split the rate? The single guy will say, let's split it by head count. The couple will say, let's split it by room count. They're both logical. Where does it end up? Somewhere in between. And that's kind of the art of where the cost of service is. And that's why we need to do that, to convince everybody that it may not be absolutely fair down to the penny, but in general, it's a fair way of cost allocation. That is the cost of service study that we're going to be doing after we figure out how much investment we need. And then finally, after we do the cost of service, we have to put them into rates, because the cost of service and rates do not necessarily go automatically. So sometimes the rates may be volumetric, meaning the more you use, the more you pay. Other times it may be like a fixed cost, like your cell phone. It may be $100 a month for unlimited usage. And there's different ways of how the utility can charge you. But that charging, the rate, is based on the cost of service, but it can be in different flavors. So that is what we have in the bottom line, cost of service and rate design. Again, the IRP defines what investments needed, along with the infrastructure resiliency based on the IRP decision. And then finally, how do we collect the money needed for that investment? From whom is the cost of service and rate design.
Now we are going to explain the approach that we are hoping to or planning to implement in each of these 4 studies. I'll talk about the IRP part of it, and then I'll pass it on to Bruce. So in the IRP study, there will be essentially 3 parts or 3 steps. First, we understand what are reasonable expectations for the future load requirements, future electricity requirements in the city. It could be driven by economic factors. It could be driven by a number of customers. It could be driven by some new things that have recently started happening, but it could accelerate in the future, like EV charging, rooftop solar installations, electrification, etc. So we are going to take all of those into account to identify the needs in the future over the next 20 years for the city. And then the next step is, now we know the needs, or at least we have an idea about the needs. Nobody knows the needs. We have a forecast about them, but every forecast is wrong. So we are going to create some scenarios around those. But now we have an idea about the needs. What are different ways of meeting those needs? One option is doing nothing. Just do with the resources that you have in the city. And if there are decreases or increases in those requirements in the future, just balance them in the PJM spot energy and capacity markets. Essentially rely on the market to the extent it is allowed based on the restrictions on cities' planning requirements. Other options could be contracting with solar and battery storage, let's say, resources, sized in a way that is consistent with the requirements in the future, and compare those costs. Which one is going to be costly? Under one scenario, one option could be, let's say, similar cost to the other one, but under another scenario of the future, then the first option, the first strategy could be dominating the other one. It could be way cheaper. So we are going to be looking at the risk profile as well as the cost comparison of different resource options. And then the third piece is, I already covered that to some extent, but let's identify key uncertainties in terms of the things that could change in the future outside the control of the city that could affect how your preferred resource portfolio could perform risk-wise against other resource options. So that's the scenario analysis. We'll be doing a quantitative analysis of comparing these resource options based on some criteria that we haven't yet finalized yet, but things like present value of cost, discounted present value of cost for the city customers. That will be one factor. We could look at emissions associated with each portfolio, greenhouse gas emissions. We could look at what are the impact on customer rates over time, maybe near-term versus later-term impacts. We'll be keeping constraints in that optimization in mind. Things like, are there any constraints on the amount of money to be spent on certain investments that would limit certain options from being feasible? Are there some limits on how much to rely on market purchases as opposed to your own or contracted resources? They will be all a part of this analysis. And we'll use market price forecasts that we are currently developing for energy and capacity prices to evaluate and compare the cost of each of these options. Essentially, that's the IRP study. Sounds simple. We'll see. It's going to get complicated, I guess, quickly. Yep.
So the IRP study is looking at long-term, 5 to 20 years. So in a common sense, it's like building a house. It takes a few years to build a house. The infrastructure resiliency is more like, okay, how do I get the wires around inside the house? Do I need an additional outlet here? Do I actually have an in-house Wi-Fi, or do I do it on a cable? That's the infrastructure, and it's more of a 1 to 3 year time frame. It's a lot shorter time frame, and it's much closer to where you are. And so what we're trying to do here is have a subcontractor called BHMG that's been working with the city for the longest time, and have them actually go through the city to identify how these smaller infrastructures like the distribution wires out there or maybe pathways can be developed. And then we'll mesh it together with the IRP so that you get a full house in the example that I gave you that's functionable. So the resiliency study is looking at a much shorter term, and if you have an extra room in your house that you're not using, you don't necessarily have to wire it today. You can leave it to later, but there's that decision that it has to be made in the infrastructure resiliency study. And again, the infrastructure study will also reflect how you want to use the system. So if there's more electric vehicles, you need more charging stations. If there's more rooftop solars, you need wires to allow that. But if there's less, then you have to adjust that investment. So that's what's going on in the infrastructure resiliency study. Again, this is a shorter term study than the IRP, but it's a way to accommodate the IRP towards your needs, and it will constantly be going over. And another thing is, a lot of the assets here are already 50 years old, and so you may have to replace them. And if you're going to replace them, you can replace them exactly the same, or you can oversize them in anticipation for future needs. And so that decision comes into the infrastructure resiliency study as well. Now, once you have all that, the question is, how do you split the cost? And the cost of service is typically divided into production, that's the power that comes out from the generators, transmission, distribution, and others. Others is like customers. So every one of you will be charged for the meters that's on your house. And I think that's about somewhere between, I don't know, $5 to $10 a month that you see on your electricity rate. But then you also have a generation charge, transmission charge, and distribution charge. If you look at your utility rate, you'll find that. So that's the functionalization. You have to split it that way. Then the next question is, how much is the fixed cost versus the variable cost? The variable cost is how much you pay for every megawatt or kilowatt hours that you use. So in the old days of the cell phones, you pay a monthly charge, but you also pay 10 cents per minute. this energy cost is the 10 cents per minute portion, but the monthly charge of $40 or whatever it was, that is the demand cost. And the reason for you splitting it is that unless you split it, if you put everything into one, then there's unfairness to it. So think about it this way. You own a car and you don't drive it at all. You still have a cost of owning that car, and that goes into the demand charge. But if you drive your car, you know how much gas it uses and how much maybe the wear and tear you have for the tires and so on and the brakes. So that goes into the energy cost. So you have these two types, and that's classification. And then finally, you figure out, okay, which customer is using what service? So for example, a house with rooftop solars versus a house without rooftop solar may be using different energy just because of the rooftop solar, but the actual connection to the house, the wires that are connected to the house may be the same. So in that case, it's better to charge the same demand charge, but different energy charge. If you just do it everything on energy, the people with the rooftops will have a lower bill, but they're not paying for that wire that can be used as an insurance afterwards, because when your solar panel's not working, you're still getting power from the utility. So that is the allocation process, and that will depend on the customer. The residential customer is one customer. There's industrial customers that have a different usage. There's commercial customers that have a different usage. What we will do is we will look at the existing cost of service study, which the city of Batavia has been sharing with us, and try to update it accordingly, but with a lot of the caveats that we talked about. And the cost of service study is typically done looking back at a past year and say in 2023, as an example, this is the total cost that was incurred, and this is how we allocated the costs. And the reason that we do it based on a historical year is the future is very uncertain. Even if we say, okay, in the future there's going to be X amount of solar panels on it, we don't know how much power it's going to produce, and we don't know how much power is going to be produced from others. And we don't even know what the weather pattern is going to be. So it's typical that you use a historical year to come up with a allocation, and once in a while you review that, maybe every 3 to 5 years, to make sure that it's up to speed. And that is the cost of service study. And then we add the rate design to it. The rate design, the cost of service is like, okay, let me step back. The IRP and the infrastructure study is baking the pie. The cost of service is slicing the pie into different pieces, and then the rate is how you serve the pie, whether you serve the pie with coffee or with cream or just as flat, whether you cut it squarely or whether you cut it in wedges. That's the rate design. So that is the kind of study that we plan on doing overall, the 4 circles that Metin presented, and that will be our deliverable for the city by this time next year, hopefully. And I'll hand it back to Metin to talk about the schedule.
Bruce is getting hungry. He keeps talking about restaurants, pies. We had a great pie earlier today at the Daddio place. Daddio, please? Daddio. Was amazing. So maybe next you are going to start talking about beer in your, okay. So the timeline-wise, we just started. We are now in March, towards the end of March. We'll be tackling some things simultaneously, some of the tasks, and some of them will come in sequence. With respect to the IRP study, since that's the first study that we are going to really perform, we created some more detailed timeline than the other studies out there. With IRP, we are going to first identify the future energy and capacity needs, as we discussed before, the prices of energy. We are going to develop forecasts of those. By the end of this month, essentially, we'll be mostly done with those. Next month, we'll be tackling the alternative resource portfolios and finalizing the market price projections. After that, start comparing the cost of different alternative resource portfolios. Then in June, July, we are going to refine those analyses, work on the scenario analyses to understand the risk profile of different portfolios. And hopefully in August, that's our plan, we are going to have the draft report for the IRP out. There will be a period, about a month, I believe, for City Council and public comment to weigh in. And after that, we are going to review those and we are going to come out with a revised study report for the IRP in October. That's our plan. So while all of this is happening with the IRP, the infrastructure resilience study will be also progressing, and it will have a draft report in September and a revised report in November of this year. Then cost of service and rate design study, it will be released essentially 1 month after the infrastructure resilience study. And as you can see, IRP is not gone out of picture. It's going to come back alive next year, early next year, to do an update. And the update will be essentially doing two things. One, what we learned from the infrastructure and the cost of service and rate design studies to inform any changes in the assumptions with respect to the IRP. And second, to the extent more information comes out between, let's say, August of this year and early next year with respect to the market outlook, with respect to the law requirements, etc., we'll make those changes early next year to have an updated IRP, again with a comment period and finalization. So that's kind of our goal here in terms of the timeline. Have some results of these studies essentially later this year, and then finalize them early next year, but in a nutshell. This is Brattle. Yeah. So I think that's our presentation here. It's a short and sweet one, hopefully. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
And just to let you know, I'm Laura Newman. I'm the city administrator for anyone that I haven't met, but I recognize almost all the faces in the audience here today. And we've got Max Weiss, he's our assistant city administrator. We've got Steve Allen, who's the manager of our electric utility. We've got Peggy Colby, she is our director of finance. And then Rahat Bari is our assistant public works director who oversees the electric utilities. So hopefully between all of us, we'll be able to answer your questions today, but if not, we'll take them and find answers for you and get back to you on those. But we are using the microphone today because we're recording our presentation so that we can post it on BATV, and those that weren't able to attend here today can listen to the recording. So we just ask that you use it to ask your questions. And by a raise of hands, does anybody have a question they would like to ask?
I actually have 3 primary questions with regard to the study, particularly the IRP. You have mentioned at least 2 or 3 times the least cost options. And I believe for both myself and many residents, there's a great concern over the fact that we have this very, very long-term contract with Prairie State, and we buy the majority of our power, if not all of the power, and more than we need from Prairie State, and that is a coal-burning plant. And when I hear least cost, I'm concerned that you're not taking into consideration environmental issues as much as many of us would like you to. Because I do understand that cost does play a role in determining any municipal utilities or any utilities portfolio, but relying solely on least cost is concerning to me. And
It isn't just cost, actually it would be driven by the city council is who are the board that govern the decision making that has to do with the policy of the utility. And so it's the least cost version that complies with the policy that the members of the city council have set. So if they were to determine that beyond the Prairie State contract, that we wanted to only look at renewable forms of generation, then that we would look for the least cost alternative that would meet their policy.
But I'm also saying that we need to do this with regard to not just when Prairie State ends or shuts down or slows down, but for any other supplemental resources that we identify as being a possibility here in Batavia. For example, if we electrify and then start increasing our use of electricity within the city, that there may be opportunities here and there, obviously not huge because of our Prairie State supply, but that those should be also taken into consideration.
Absolutely. And they will. So that's a policy decision for the city council to drive that decision making.
Okay, but where is the policy that says that city council wants environmental issues to be taken into consideration in the weighting process?
It's in the elective form of government.
No,
they are representing
so they have a policy. So where is that? Where is that stated? That's
one of the places where it is stated is in the strategic plan. And so that is where they have prioritized their goals and then back that up. That is something that drives our budgets and the way that we prioritize projects.
Okay. All right. So my second question is with regard to Prairie State itself. And I know you did indicate a couple of times a reference to the partial or full shutdown of the plant. It seems to me that in weighing options, we need to have an understanding of what the cost-benefit analysis is and risk and uncertainty analysis is for the plant as it's currently operating, so we know where we are on that issue. And then also for the plant as it may operate with the installation of a carbon capture system, because the Prairie State Management Company is pursuing carbon capture. Now, whether that will happen or not, obviously, is a different question. But if we are going to be looking into the future, it seems to me that would be also something to consider. Would that be something that you would typically consider?
So that goes to the contract that Batavia has with NIMPA. So Batavia has an obligation through the power sales agreement to purchase 55 megawatts of power through NIMPA from Prairie State. The actual management of Prairie State, the risk analysis of Prairie State, that is a NIMPA, not a Batavia.
No, the cost of putting that on. Yes, NIMPA decides, the other 8 agencies with NIMPA decides whether to do that. But that has a cost to Batavia if it's done. That is if you're going to talk about what is our cost of our electricity as Prairie State is currently running, how is that cost going to affect Batavia's costs with the carbon capture system running, or when Prairie State shuts down? I see those as all relevant.
They're all
our
interconnected.
Process, and it's not NIMPA's problem, and it's not just Prairie State's problem. It is our problem because we're paying for it.
They are all interconnected, and you are paying for it through your contract with NIMPA. NIMPA, though, is the owner of Prairie State. So
You know that.
you did,
I do know that.
yeah, okay. So NIMPA, though, owns Prairie State. So all we do from NIMPA is we get a bill. We have a contract and we get a bill. And so Batavia is not going to manage the risk. I don't understand why you're laughing. I'm just trying to explain it. Batavia is not going to manage the risk of Prairie State. Batavia, as I've indicated to City Council on several occasions, we're one of 3 votes of NIMPA, and NIMPA is one of 9 votes of Prairie State. And so, yes, will the decisions made concerning Prairie State impact Batavia from a cost standpoint? Yes. Does Batavia have the authority within our study to be able to say we're going to choose option A or option B? No, we don't. And right now, even Batavia doesn't know about carbon capture. As you know, I sat on the carbon capture subcommittee, and even Prairie State's owners don't know about carbon capture. So I'm not sure how we're supposed to account for the cost of carbon capture when that is a theoretical idea that hasn't even been pursued past the initial theoretical concept stage.
If I can jump in.
The problem is we do not know what we don't know what this is costing us. And
well,
if
we
we're
know exactly what Prairie State is costing us. Do we know what
we don't know what
capture?
Everything we are being told is that this is going to have no cost to us if carbon capture is put on. And if we're going to do a study about future costs, it seems like we should know what that.
What happens if the
cost will be.
owners don't even know?
Okay. I'm going to move on.
Well, no, I think that's a valid question that I just asked. For you to imply that we are like ignoring a key factor, what I'm trying to tell you is we're not ignoring a key factor because even the owners of the power plant don't even know the answer to that key factor, which is why the owners of the power plant haven't moved forward with that topic. So it's impossible for us to include that key factor in our study when nobody even knows what the answer to that key factor might be.
But they're going to prove it without knowing what that key factor is.
And no one has ever even come out and said they're going to approve it.
Well, I think this is a very serious problem, and I will move on. My last statement is, again, as a municipal utility, Batavia has a captive customer base. Unlike our neighbors in West Chicago, Aurora, where you can choose what kind of electricity you want, you can buy into a community solar program. We have to, with the few exceptions of people who want to put solar on their house or on their business, have to purchase our property here. And quite frankly, the stakeholder involvement that is shown in there, where our only involvement occurs when the IRP is basically done and in draft form, is woefully insufficient. And I realize that this is an issue for City Council to address, but I believe very much that stakeholders need more of a say. We get virtually no say anymore over the fact that we have this long-term contract with Prairie State. We're stuck with it. We all understand we are stuck with it. But here's our opportunity to have a say in the future of further electrification of our city and the resources to do that with. And I think we should have a greater say earlier in the process and be informed regularly throughout the process. And then again, yes, have a say on the final product before it is actually finalized.
And can you pull up the calendar? The proposed calendar? So from tonight's meeting until that first yellow part in the IRP there, which is later this summer, between now and then, I will 100% guarantee you it will not be radio silence. City staff will keep council updated. You are welcome. Everyone here is welcome to show up at any council meeting to talk about this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Holm, that's not enough. period.
fine,
And I
thank you.
leave it to city council to address that issue for me.
Okay.
This is not enough.
So the first yellow period then is a formal public comment period. Then another draft is created, and then as Menton indicated, actually again in early 2026, there's another draft, another yellow colored period for more public comment before the final report is made. So the first public comment period is not at all after the cake has been baked. I mean, the first public comment period is very early in the process, still a good 6 months until the final report is finalized. Again, and this is modeled, as you know, Mr. Rousseau, this is modeled right after the draft legislation.
No, it is not.
Yes, it is.
No, it is not. There is a preliminary meeting before the actual study occurs.
That's what we're having this evening.
I don't know what the portfolio plan is. I don't know.
But we don't yet either. That's what we went over tonight.
I don't know what what assumptions they're using, how they're going to develop the plan, what the constraints are going to be that they're going to talk about. I don't know what their assessment of our current Prairie State situation is and what potential capital expenditures are going to be used. That's what we should have some input on and understanding of as this goes forward.
All of that will be included in that first study report completion date.
Without
and
our
can be-
involvement.
No. Once you see it in that report, that's a perfect opportunity to say, I think you missed a huge alternative that you didn't even consider and that you should go
Why
back and
not
study that and
do
add it.
initially instead of saying this was a huge mistake, go back and do it again?
You
not going to do
you
that.
can do that now. So if there's something that you would like to see included in the plan, that's part of this stakeholder meeting today, is for you to provide any information
I don't
that you
have
would
enough
like them to
information
consider.
about what they are planning to study to comment on it.
It's outlined in the formal
I saw it
outline there.
30 minutes ago, Ms. Newman. Somebody else.
And this isn't the last time that you can give input, so you may have seen it first today, but if you have questions, staff, and if we need to reach out to Brattle Group, we'll do that. It's not like you only get opportunities to ask questions at this meeting. You can ask questions anytime or provide comments.
I just wanted to reiterate some of Susan's points and something else that I circled while we were talking about it. First, thank you so much for being here and for presenting this and doing this kickoff meeting for us. To Susan's point, many places where it says the least cost option, it does say meet the city's objectives. So I think one of the first things that I'm going to recommend, and I'll bring it up this evening at COW to have another conversation, is that we do need to have a very well articulated, published set of objectives that have been vetted and discussed with stakeholders like this. That set of objectives does not exist right now, to my knowledge. So getting that set of direction from the community. Do we want to be 100% renewable? Do we want to reopen the Challenge Factory and produce windmills here in town for our own, consumption? Do we want to stay with a coal plant? Do we want to align ourselves with the county plan, the state plan, any federal plans, international plans? We want to evaluate all of our plans against that. That's a conversation we have not had that City Council does need to articulate and publish, get your feedback, have you involved at those meetings. And then also, I think it would also, in the same discussion or in another one, all those model factors. So the present value, net present value, discounted net present value, greenhouse gas emissions, how much are these going to be weighted? How much are these going to be factored? What other things are we not considering? I would like to see that big long list at a city council meeting before you go into your planning mode, so that we're all playing from the same playbook.
All right. Unintentionally, my questions are similar, though perhaps more directed to you two gentlemen. I'm looking to find out, well, if we look at this in a series of concentric circles, the further view is more, how much are your answers for the IRP and the infrastructure resilience study going to be researched versus contacted and found real-time results or answers from the parties involved? And then kind of digging into that a little bit, will your answers be cited? Meaning when we see that the plans are developed, that the studies are developed, excuse me, are we going to be getting a study which outlines this is the cost, this is to be expected, or are we going to be getting that study and say, this is the cost, this is to be expected because we found this at this location? So it's, what does that study look like in terms of how we can then, because we're interested parties, take a look at the reasoning that you had to develop that?
Craig, can I just understand your question a little better? In other words, are they going to cite to references that they used to obtain the information that was used to make their recommendations?
And
I just have a question about, I want to make sure we're answering the right question.
looking for me to clarify.
Yes.
Looking more for, is this going to be just based on a conversation that you have with someone, which is unable to be corroborated or verified, or is that a published, cited source that we can say, oh, I understand the pathway that took you from that document to why you made this recommendation in your study?
Okay, maybe I can take this on. So thanks for the question. We are not going to do a study based on conversations or hearsay. It will be very supported by assumptions, are supported based on what is in the industry studies that are reliable. So by reading the report, you'll be able to say, oh, here is why they use this particular assumption. Here is why they picked this, but didn't pick the other one. So hopefully it will be clear enough from reading the study, if that answers your question.
May I ask a short follow-up? That might be too close. Do you have other redacted studies that we could review ahead of time as part of the hopefully understood intent to have the public's perspective taken into account on this?
What do you mean by redacted studies?
I think he means publicly available.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah, if you go to our website, you can see all of our publicly available studies. So unless it is in a litigation context or if it is for the internal consumption of our client, most of our studies are publicly available, not redacted. So just go to our website and take a look.
All right. Thank you again for speaking with us. I think this has been really insightful. Maybe just to kind of help us all understand what's coming down the line, can you explain what the stakeholder outreach process looks like in sort of as much detail? Are we talking in-person meetings, online surveys? Who are you counting as a stakeholder and who is not a stakeholder? And sort of what specifically are you looking for from stakeholders? And how can we best prepare to give you our stakeholder input?
I think that's better for Laura and Gary to answer.
It would be, I think in-person meetings are a great way to provide the opportunity for people to hear folks like Susan, who have been so involved with this topic, ask the many questions that she has that maybe they didn't even think of themselves. And then also, it's nice to have a meeting like this because then it can end up online for others who are interested in learning more about it to see it. But I think that you get a broader appeal when you're able to also accept, electronic questions from people as well. So we would invite people who they don't have to attend a meeting in order to provide the feedback, but we would also provide them a means to provide us with their questions and comments electronically, and then gather all that information together in one place in a document that looks like a FAQ.
And just to follow up to that, so are we envisioning that the city of Batavia is handling the stakeholder outreach, or is Brattle Group going to bring their expertise in stakeholder engagement as part of this process?
So I would anticipate that the mechanics of the stakeholder feedback would be handled by the city, but I can see that the reason why we have hired them as experts is for their expertise in being able to respond in a meaningful manner to people's comments, so that you get the best answer possible from them. But there are also aspects of it that are city council and staff related type of questions that we would field. But if it has to do with the expertise that these gentlemen bring to creating that report, then we would get the answers from them and coordinate the responses. Any other questions?
This is sort of a follow-up question. So are there, at present, are there any planned surveys from Brattle Group for the Batavia residents or public, or are there any surveys planned as part of your process?
We are not doing any surveys. That's not in the process.
For stakeholders, no surveys?
No.
And
They're looking at usage information and the data that they had noted in this presentation that they're collecting. I think we've sent you probably about a boxcar full of information about the past history of our electric utility.
Yes.
To utilize as part of their analysis. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this. If community members decide to host or create their own educational forums to prepare the community to do this, is the city willing to help support that? Perhaps publish the information and or maybe supply information if we, or at least attempt?
Oh, sure. I mean, Freedom of Information Act allows anyone to be provided any documents that we have that could assist you with that.
Would the city be interested in partnering with a civic organization from the city, setting up their own study group on this so that they have an idea of what is happening while it's happening rather than trying to figure it out after the fact?
I'm happy for anyone to approach me with a proposal for what that would look like, but I don't want to be doing a project that is parallel to what these gentlemen are doing because they have been hired specifically to do exactly that.
That would be very duplicative, and we're not capable of doing that. I was just asking.
But if you would want to have further conversation, feel free to contact me about that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Final question.
One final question.
How are you determining what our future needs are based on something that is not solely based in the past, but assuming our demands change? How is that determined if you're not asking?
It's not a matter of opinion of people, really. It is just a matter of what others in the region are doing and expecting in their long-term planning studies. That is, we are reviewing those. For example, what the ComEd region or youth service territory is going to be experiencing based on the projections. That's going to be one of the inputs to this. We also review the studies by government agencies with respect to the outlook for load and determinants of it. So we'll be looking at various studies out there to inform what we are going to create as our forecast, as the base case, as well as our scenarios, sensitivities on that unknown factor.
So we are going to do our best to model 10,000 customers. Obviously, those customers vary from big and small and large users and very minor users, and all of that needs to be rolled up into this plan, right? So if anyone in this room or anyone else that you end up talking with feels that there is a particularly Batavia-specific criteria that we should be incorporating because it sets our entire community apart from the region, we'd certainly want to hear that. The approach that we're at least starting with is, we're a Fox Valley community in Western Chicagoland, surrounded by ComEd. What generally in the area is happening? If there's something very specific to Batavia that we feel that our community is going to be, I'll use EVs as an example. We are going to be the standout, and we're going to adopt more EVs than any other surrounding community. And we think, to your point, we think so because of this citation, this specific reason, then we're happy to incorporate that. If there's nothing that stands out for a very specific reason, then we're just going to use kind of general regional data, which represents us.
And if I may supplement that, to the extent there are announcements by organizations, large customers of doing certain things in the future, of course, we are going to be taking those into account too.
I'll add that in general, all our assumptions, for example, what the future fuel price may be, or what the future cost of solar panels may be, or what the future cost of wires that you want to add maybe will be documented. Now, there may be some discussion saying, well, the general study says the cost of a wire is how much. But in the case of Batavia, if you look back at historical expenses, it's actually a little bit different. Those will be identified and reported, and that could fall under what you may call a survey or discussion. But in general, you should be able to follow the data sources that we're using in the study.
I want to thank everybody for coming out here today. I think it's great that we had almost every, seat filled here today and that there's such interest in this project. We look forward to sharing the progress with you as the project goes along, not just at those milestone dates. And I'd like to thank Mr. Chalebi and Mr. Tsuchida for their time today and sharing this presentation with us. Thank you very much.
We've given you the handouts, but if anyone wants an electronic version of the presentation, reach out to myself, reach out to Laura. Yep, reach out to Max.